Right, we now come to questions to Solicitor General Douglas McAllister.
Mr. Speaker, question number 1.
Solicitor General.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start by congratulating US Attorney General Pam Bondi on her confirmation yesterday. The Attorney General and I look forward to working closely with her on our long list of shared priorities. Mr. Speaker, CPS prosecutors perform vital work to serve the public and deliver justice for victims. We've taken steps to strengthen the CPS workforce, including by boosting staff numbers in specialist rape and serious sexual assault units. By being tough on crime, supporting victims and restoring confidence in our criminal justice system. All of these things are part of this government's mission to make our streets safe, and the CPS has a key role to play in that mission.
Douglas McAllister.
Mr. Speaker, will the Solicitor General join me in welcoming this government's increased funding to the Crown Prosecution Service for specialist sexual offence prosecution units? Does she agree with me that we must continue to tackle violence against women and girls across our nation, and join me in paying tribute to the dedication of our prosecutors and police at the front line confronting these crimes?
Absolutely. I'm delighted to join my honourable friend in paying tribute not only to police and prosecutors in his constituency, but right across the United Kingdom. He's right to welcome the increased funding that we've secured for the CPS. Our recently agreed settlement will ensure the CPS can recruit more specialist prosecutors, delivering this vital work and putting those who commit these abhorrent crimes behind bars.
Gregory.
Mr. Speaker, given the backlog in the Crown Court in terms of appearances and the increasing tide of knife crime as well as criminal activity against women and girls, what steps are being taken by the Department to ensure that the Crown Prosecution Service is adequately provided for to ensure justice is seen to be done by the wider community?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend, the honourable member, I should say, makes a very important point, and it's something that this government is working very hard to do. The settlement for the CPS, Mr. Speaker, that I referred to was an extra £49 million, and some of that the CPS is spending on increasing the number of prosecutors who are able to do the very important work to which he refers.
Ellis.
Question 2, please, Mr. Speaker.
Solicitor General.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 2 and 11 together. The scale of violence against women and girls in this country is completely intolerable, and this government is treating it as the national emergency that it is. The CPS has begun securing convictions of offenders who've breached domestic abuse protection orders, a scheme that this government introduced in November 2024 to better protect victims of domestic abuse. Whilst there is much more to be done, this is just one example of the clear action this government is taking to meet our mission to halve violence against women and girls in a decade.
While the national conviction rate of domestic abuse cases is woefully low in this country, standing at 4.5%, the picture is even worse in rural constituencies like mine in Ribble Valley, where the overall conviction rate for rural communities is only 3%. So can the Solicitor General tell me what she sees as the unique challenges in rural areas and what steps she is taking to tackle those more specifically?
Solicitor General.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend raises a very important issue. She's right to highlight those unique risks faced by women in rural areas, including in her constituency, one of which is that increased isolation can bring with it more risk. To tackle violence against women, we know we need to address the overall number of prosecutions, which is still, unfortunately, far too low. And that's why, working with the CPS and the police, we've brought in the Domestic Abuse Joint Justice Plan, which I'm pleased to say is already leading to a modest increase in referrals of domestic abuse cases to improve the investigation, prosecution and handling of domestic abuse cases.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In June 2024, 60% of rape investigations were closed because the victim dropped out. On top of that, I've heard harrowing stories from my own constituents who went to court over their sexual assault and they felt humiliated and have been further traumatised by that process. Could the Solicitor General tell me what work is being done to ensure that victims of sexual violence are treated with empathy and respect during the court process?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend asked a very pertinent question. I'm sure the whole House will be sorry to hear of the examples that she raises. She's absolutely right that all victims ought to be treated with empathy and with respect. And victims' loss of confidence in the criminal justice system is something, of course, that undermines the entire process of justice itself. I'm working with the CPS to ensure better support for victims in rape and serious sexual offence cases, including with the hire of victim liaison officers into teams prosecuting these cases. I had the pleasure of meeting some of these victim liaison officers, Mr Speaker, whilst visiting the CPS in Cardiff, and I was able to hear firsthand of the vital work that they're doing to support victims.
A bit more.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituency is blighted by the shocking crime of child sexual exploitation, and rebuilding trust amongst victims in our crime and justice system is vital if we are to see victims come forward. Recently, Mr Speaker, 8 men from my constituency were sentenced for the horrendous gang rape of 2 children and received shockingly short sentences, with one just as low as 3 years. I've written to the Attorney General on this issue, but will the Solicitor General agree with me today that these weak sentences are hugely damaging to trust in our justice system, and will she commit via the Attorney General to review them?
Solicitor General.
Mr Speaker, the example that he refers to is indeed a heinous one. The conduct of those that have been involved in such crimes has rightly shocked and appalled people right across the country. The Honourable Member refers to a referral to the Attorney General's office, and it's therefore not appropriate for me to comment on that specific case further.
Sarah Dyke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I've had many victims of domestic abuse write to me following lengthy periods of inaction from the police, CPS and other organisations, leaving victims at risk and feeling horribly anxious. How will the Minister ensure prosecution rates improve and that victims have confidence in the criminal justice system?
Solicitor General.
Mr Speaker, the Honourable Member makes a very important point, and again I'm very sorry to hear of the examples that she raises. This government has a historic mission to halve violence against women and girls in a decade, and we're taking a series of very important steps to work towards the increased number of prosecutions that the Honourable Member refers to. For example, Mr Speaker, introducing specialist rape and serious and sexual offences teams into every police force, working to increase referrals with the recently launched Domestic Abuse Joint Justice Plan, fast-tracking rape cases, introducing free independent legal advisors for victims of adult rape, and I referred earlier, Mr Speaker, to domestic abuse protection orders, the first convictions for breach of which are already being seen through the system.
Gregory Poynton. Gregor Poynton.
Mr Speaker.
Solicitor General.
Mr Speaker, the SFO does crucial work to tackle complex fraud, bribery and corruption. I've met with senior SFO staff on multiple occasions in the last 2 months, and I recently visited SFO HQ to understand more about the ways they're putting the latest technology to use in tackling economic crime and returning stolen funds to victims. Under the new director of the SFO, Mr Speaker, the SFO has opened 7 new overt investigations and charged 10 defendants in cases involving more than 800 victims.
I thank my honourable friend for her answer. Mr Speaker, my honourable friend will know that fraud does not stop at the border, and residents in my Livingston constituency are incredibly concerned about the increase in fraud and economic crime and the devastating effects it can have on people's lives. Therefore, can I ask what the UK Government is doing to tackle fraud in Scotland?
Solicitor General.
Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. Fraud doesn't acknowledge borders, particularly when it comes to the increasing harms associated with online fraud. And that's why it's so important that the SFO works closely with the Scottish law enforcement authorities. In this respect, Mr Speaker, and indeed in others, this government is fully committed to strengthening the Union.
Jim Shum.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank the Attorney General very much for that reply. When it comes to economic crime, of course, we in Northern Ireland understand that economic crime is used by paramilitaries to fund their organisations and criminal groups as well. So can I ask the Attorney General this question? If we look at America, where Al Capone was put in jail not for the crimes that he committed but for tax evasion and financial issues, could the Attorney General target those paramilitary groups for their efforts to raise money illegally under economic aspirations?
Solicitor General.
Mr Speaker, the Honourable Member makes an important point, and economic crime is something that this government takes incredibly seriously, including when it links to the serious type of activity to which the Honourable Member refers.
Jack Rankin.
Question number 4, Mr Speaker.
Mr General.
Mr Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 4, 6 and 10 together. The Attorney-General's Office has a rigorous process for identifying and dealing with conflicts and potential conflicts which arise from the law officer's former practice. As part of that process, the AGO adopts a cautious and beyond reproach threshold to any conflicts or potential conflicts. These arrangements are long-standing and part of a standard practice that is applied across successive administrations.
Jack Rankin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Solicitor General for her answer, but 3 former law officers have criticised the Attorney-General for not declaring his earnings, labelling it as, quote, irregular and a break with, quote, normal practice. Who is in the wrong here, Solicitor General? The 3 former law officers or the Attorney-General?
Solicitor General.
Mr Speaker, the Honourable Member will know that the Attorney ceased all private practice following his appointment as Attorney-General. He refers to fee agreements. Well, he'll know that there are different arrangements and requirements for declarations for members of the House of Lords and for members of the House of Commons. And it doesn't matter which type of fee agreement is in place between a lawyer and their client, because the entirety of those fee agreements, whether it's a CFA, a DBA, a fully paid basis or acting pro bono, they're always going to be caught by the conflicts process. These requirements that I referred to for the purposes of the House of Lords are the same for all peers, and they apply just as much to the Shadow Attorney-General as they do to the Attorney.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. Does the Solicitor General agree with the recent policy exchange research paper, Conflicts of Interest and the Law Officers Convention, authored by Dr Conor Casey, who is a senior lecturer at Surrey Law School and is supported by 3 former ministers who are all KCs, that questions about the potential conflict of interest relating to the work of the Attorney-General by invoking the Law Officers Convention would be an error, as such questions do not actually fall within the scope of the Convention?
Solicitor General.
Mr Speaker, as I've said, the Attorney-General's Office has a rigorous process for identifying and dealing with conflicts and potential conflicts that arise from the law officer's former practice. And the Law Officers Convention to which he refers exists for very, very good reason, which is to enable the government of this country to receive full and frank advice. In any event, Mr Speaker, the Attorney has been clear that he doesn't agree with that report, and in particular he doesn't agree that a law officer would indicate whether or not they've recused themselves from a particular matter, because that in itself would breach the Law Officers Convention.
My constituents of Central Suffolk and North Ipswich are decent, tolerant and thoughtful people, but they are left wondering how the Prime Minister has appointed an Attorney-General who is a friend, a Labour Party donor, someone who has represented Jerry Adams, Shamima Begum and Hamas, and has clearly got questions to answer regarding outside earnings. Does the Minister think that the AG was an appropriate appointment?
Mr Speaker, again, unfortunately, the opposition are falling into the trap of believing that barristers are their clients. It's the deliberate conflation of representation and endorsement. As the Honourable Member will be fully aware, as I said, barristers are not their clients in the same way that surgeons are not their patients. This is a foundational principle of the British legal and judicial systems, and they ought not to undermine it.
John Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Solicitor General agree with me that the UK legal system is the envy of the world and a key engine for growth in our economy? The party opposite risk undermining a fundamental principle of our legal system, that everyone has the right to representation and lawyers can represent their clients without fear or favour.
Mr Speaker, I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend. The party opposite would do better to talk up our excellent British legal and judicial systems rather than consistently seeking to undermine the foundational principles to which my honourable friend refers.
Solicitor General Helen.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Attorney-General has admitted recusing himself from certain matters. He has also maintained absolute silence about which matters they may be. In these circumstances, Mr. Speaker, we must ask ourselves, is this the level of transparency our democracy demands? And I therefore ask the Solicitor General, what safeguards exist when the Attorney General's past clients and present duties overlap? Who, independent of the Attorney General himself, scrutinises these critical decisions on recusal? Or do we face the concerning spectacle of the government's chief legal adviser marking his own homework?
Mr. Speaker, as I've outlined, the Attorney General's office has rigorous and long-standing processes in place. Upon appointment, the AGO compiles a list of matters in which the law officer has previously been involved, and this is done by searching cases, cross-referencing with information obtained by the law officer's chambers or firm, and working through the list with the law officers themselves. The office works with the Government Legal Department, the FCDO, the Crown Prosecution Service and the Serious Fraud Office to obtain additional information and compile the final list of conflicts and actions associated with each. But as the Shadow Solicitor General knows, the attorney cannot publish a list of his former clients due to client confidentiality. The attorney has already... They groan, Mr. Speaker. Client confidentiality is a fundamental principle. It's just absolutely ridiculous. The attorney... Mr. Speaker, the Shadow Solicitor General also mentioned recusal. The attorney has already indicated in the other place that he has recused himself from matters, and the Law Officers Convention prohibits me from listing which matters these are. But, Mr. Speaker, no other law officer has ever published a list of the cases that they're recused from.
The Solicitor General, rightly and properly, her predecessor, rightly and properly, and every Conservative law officer from the previous administration understood their duty to declare previous earnings. And so I ask the Solicitor General, why does the Attorney General refuse to declare monies received from his practice as a barrister? Why doesn't he acknowledge whether he continues to receive such payments when his predecessors routinely declared both? And why does this Attorney General think there is one rule for him and another rule for everyone else?
Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General is in the House of Lords, and therefore the rules which apply to the House of Lords and the Attorney General are different from the requirements that apply to the House of Commons. That is the difference between the Attorney and I, and indeed the previous Solicitor General and I. So those requirements, as I said, Mr. Speaker, they're the same for all peers, including the Attorney, and they apply just as much to the Shadow Attorney General as they do to the Attorney. And I'd also note, Mr. Speaker, that the Lord Standards Commissioner has said that they've considered the complaints made by the Shadow Justice Secretary regarding the peers' code of conduct and dismissed those complaints.
Can I just say, we've gone past half-past it. We do need to see if we can get through some questions. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 5.
Solicitor General.
Mr. Speaker, I'll be more brief. This government is committed to strengthening relations with devolved governments and fostering greater collaboration built on mutual respect and trust. As you'd expect, the law officers very regularly meet with our counterparts to discuss our shared priorities.
John Lemon.
The SNP's deposit return scheme was a complete shambles which the last Conservative government stopped, preventing it from hurting Scottish businesses with more regulation and higher costs. Now, the SNP government is now facing legal action over the scheme, with businesses seeking hundreds of millions of pounds in compensation. Now, I appreciate she can't comment on a live case, but will the Solicitor General confirm the SNP government will be solely responsible for any costs that may be incurred in handling this case?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member is right. I can't comment on that specific matter that he raises, but I'm happy to look at it and to write to him about it.
Sarah Coombs.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Solicitor General.
Mr. Speaker, new technology has the potential to bring transformative benefits to the criminal justice system, as indeed it does to public services more broadly. With regard to artificial intelligence specifically, both the CPS and the SFO are keen to explore opportunities for efficiency that this new technology can bring, whilst of course being mindful of ethical considerations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have seen a sickening rise in predators using AI technology to generate child sexual abuse images. I'm glad that the government recently announced measures to close the loopholes on this area, but can the Minister assure us that the whole criminal justice system is using every new technology and AI, as well as tough sentences, to crack down on this and protect children and victims of this horrific abuse?
Solicitor General.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to raise this extremely important point. That is exactly why I welcome the Home Secretary's announcement that this government will be the first country in the world to make it illegal to possess, create or distribute AI tools designed to generate child sexual abuse material, punishable by up to 5 years in prison.
Dave Robertson. Who's the...
Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to keeping everyone in this country safe, whether you live in a town, a city or in a rural area. That's why we're putting more police officers and PCSOs on the beat, and it's why we've bolstered the Crown Prosecution Service's workforce. With specific regard to rural crime, Mr. Speaker, we're committed to implementing the Equipment Theft Prevention Act and the continued funding of the National Rural Crime Unit.
Dave Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I'm sure the Solicitor General knows, fly tipping is the most commonly reported rural crime. And in 2022-23, the last year where there's full data, there were well over 13,000 significant multi-load incidents, and I use the phrase specifically as it's an internal description. They cost more than £4 million to clear up, and yet there were just 22 custodial sentences handed out in that time. What assurances can you give to me and my constituents that the most egregious examples of fly tipping, like we saw in Lichfield 2 weeks ago, will result in jail time for the perpetrators?
Solicitor General.
Mr. Speaker, fly tipping blights communities, and I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for raising this issue. I know he's also raised it with the Minister for Rural Affairs, but I'm happy to arrange a meeting with his local Chief Crown Prosecutor to discuss this matter further.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Ben Maguire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The tragic hit-and-run case in my rural North Cornwall constituency of Ryan Sultan and many other cases across the country highlights a concerning problem in our legal system. The driver failed to stop, failed to render aid at the scene, or even call 999, leaving Ryan for dead. The case was heard in a magistrates' court where the driver received a 4-month suspended sentence. Ryan's parents, Helen and Mark, and sister Leanne, have campaigned tirelessly on this issue. Can I ask the Solicitor General to please look into this issue in conjunction with the CPS and Department for Transport, and to meet with me to discuss her findings?
Solicitor General.
Mr. Speaker, this is a profoundly tragic case, and I'm very grateful to the honourable member for raising it. My heartfelt condolences go to Ryan's family. I know they and others have been campaigning for changes to the law in this area and supporting families who have been through similarly tragic circumstances. I'll make sure to discuss this case that he raises with my colleagues at the Ministry of Justice and ensure that he receives a full response.
Yeah. Tom Gordon.
Question 9, Mr. Speaker, please.
Solicitor General.
Mr. Speaker, whether online or in person, stirring up hatred or inciting violence will not be tolerated. This government is determined to take swift and robust action to stamp out hate crime, and perpetrators will face the full force of the law.
Tom Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. February marks LGBT History Month, and last night many people came together at Mr. Speaker's house to hear about the progress that's been made in tackling hate crime against the LGBT community. I wondered if the Solicitor General would be able to outline what support and steps have been taken to ensure that trans people in particular feel safe and their perpetrators of hate crime towards trans people are brought to justice.
Solicitor General.
Mr Speaker, the CPS prosecutes all cases that are referred to it, provided that they meet the full code test for Crown prosecutors. I think we'd all admit the CPS and the Police National Hate Crime leads, I think we'd all admit rather that there's more to do, indeed the instance to which he refers. The CPS and Police National Hate Crime leads are committed to joint working to increase the number of police referrals to the CPS for hate crime offences.
The Select Committee and the Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Most grateful. The Criminal Legal Aid Advisory Board has asked the Government to raise fees in rape and serious sexual offences cases to address the shortage of advocates. But prosecutors often earn 30 to 40% less than defence barristers in the same case. Does the Solicitor General think she should have a look at fees to make sure there isn't a shortage of advocates going forward, particularly in these serious cases?
Solicitor General.
Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right to identify this as a problem. I know from discussions with RASO charities in my own constituency that the shortage of counsel is a direct contributor to cases being adjourned or delayed. It contributes to the unfortunate slow pace of justice and, of course, to victim attrition as part of that process. Ministers at the Ministry of Justice have committed to working with the Bar leadership via the Criminal Legal Aid Advisory Board and to look at the longer-term reform of legal aid.
That completes questions. We'll let the front bench change over.